In this video, I want to cover some of the updates we've made in version 4.4 of our ESS portal application in regards to configuring and changing card objects. And card objects, again, are those types of records that can be displayed on the status page, can be displayed on the search results page. They can be representations of a table in ServiceNow, but they can also be representations of a REST endpoint, an integrated component. So let's go look at kind of, first of all, the screen changes, the form change that was made with our card object screens with 4.4. So one thing we did is there's multiple tables in play for card object records. There's card object types, there's actions, there's attributes, there's a card object record, there's process, or there's scripts, there's card object browse views. So we tried to make it to where you can see kind of in one place all that information. So what you'll find now is on the card object record, there's now a tab for type information, which allows you to change the type information. This is part of this incidence type. Some of the other things you'll see in here are like the color class, the order in which it should display amongst other types, whether you want it to be part of the server storage records, etc. The processing script kind of moved to its own separate tab. There's also a new additional attribute for list attributes. I'll kind of cover this in a little bit. And then the attributes, as the kind of seen before, kind of in this list, of where you can either have a scripted attribute or kind of a field attribute. One other notable change that's happened is related to the card actions, the card filters, and the suggestion scripts, which I'll show in another type, is that what you'll find with these is that the actions themselves now can be associated more macroly, in that they can either be an action that you say I want to have available to all card types, which means that it'll apply to all of them. You can have them tied to the status card types, which in this case are anything that's defined as a status card object, in essence, can inherit this action as an available action. Or if you tie it to specific card types, then you have to be more specific on which those are defined. So this gives some benefits to inheritance. So now if I add a new status card type, we're going to see the cancel, the provide update actions is available. The same thing for filters. So if you go to these filter records, what you'll find is now this has an availability field on it. This is all card types. If I were to make it status card types, then it'll apply to the status card types, or specific ones will have a specific list that goes along. So noted that if I go to a different card object type, so if I go to like catalog items, for example, you'll see the same thing kind of applies to these suggestion scripts. These have the same kind of routes of being able to be kind of all types or specific card types as well. All right, let me highlight what this, I mentioned I was going to talk about what this list attributes does. And so what this is doing is, in essence, you have a way of defining a full list of attributes that you want to have available for the card object type. But when you're in a card list view, you can, if you define the list attributes, it's going to basically just take that subset and just build that subset in this list. And the benefit of this is some performance. You could have, in essence, two sets of lists. You could have my full list of card attributes that I could build in a detailed view, and then in my list view, kind of a summary list of those things. Now this is, can add to performance in terms of there's certain components that you don't want to have built out when it's in a list, then you can exclude that from here. Now it does mean that if I added a new field or new attributes and the list attributes are defined, so for example, maybe I want to list out the category of my incident, define that as incident category as far as the label goes. That's right, I added my template, add my new field to that. What I'll probably see is that it won't display in my list because it's not part of my list attributes. So I'll see category but no value. Right, so now if we go back to my card object record, if I define in my list attributes incident underscore category is what I believe I called that attribute, and we refresh this list, now we'll see that value in there. So that's kind of how that works. So that's one thing to note: if you have attributes that you're defining, they're not in you have list attributes defined, and you're displaying something in the template and it doesn't show up, and chances are it needs to be defined in that. All right, the other big update is kind of in the ability to create new card objects and kind of through some templating. So what you'll find is if I do a new card object, now you get this kind of a prompted list. Do I want it to be a basic table-based object? Do I want it to be a status card object? Do I want it to be a REST-based card object? These are all going to steer me in different directions. So let's just start with, let's do with the status-based card object as an example. So this is going to kind of assume I'm building this from a table, right? So I can, in essence, build this from, say, the change request table. Right, do I want to clone an existing card object? In this case, I do. I'm going to actually take the instance as an example. And the benefit of this is it's going to take the attributes, some of the type specifications, and use those as kind of a template for this. I can also reuse that card type and just kind of commingle data from the change requests and display it as incidents through the portal. But in this case, I do want to actually create a new type for this. So it's going to use this as kind of its starting point. I'm just going to label it a little differently. I'll call it changes. And I'll leave change request as the card type. We'll choose label of yellow. And I'll just do ticket alt as our font awesome icon. Then I say submit. And now what we'll find is that basically a lot of that information has been copied and cloned. It's reordered to the list, end of this list, kind of built in some of the details because it's a status card object. It also set the default page to the ticket page. Duplicated some of the processing script information, set up the additional kind of information list based off of the same clone of the incident table, cloned and copied the attributes here as well, right? Inherited a lot of the actions, inherited a lot of the filters, right? So a lot of the work's been done for me just through that kind of cloning operation. Now the other thing I can do here, or probably should do here, is associate how this gets associated to people, right? So assigned to, we'll leverage that as kind of the way to link it to individuals. All right, so now when I refresh my status page, what I should see is that changes are now on my list. If I do a list of changes, right, I see the one that I just assigned to myself as kind of a list here. And obviously, if I go click on this and see the details, it's going to take me to that defined page. That's kind of one way to create a new one, right? So they obviously, the card objects do have other ones you can create as well. Like if I start new, and I do a REST-based one, it's going to kind of prompt me for some of the same details that are in there. Right? If I do a basic table-based one, you'll see a lot of the same options here as well in terms of pre-configuring which table name, which one to clone from, etc. So that should help ease the configuration of new card objects. The other thing I want to highlight that's been updated in the card objects is you can take a record like this changes, for example, and as part of the type, you'll see there's a new user criteria records kind of component to this, right? So if I come in here and I associate this to ESS portal admins, of which I fit that criteria, which in this case is assigned to a specific role. So what I'm going to find if I go to my check status page and I refresh this is that changes will show up in my list. Now, if we go to a different user, I'll go to Joe Employee as an example. And Joe Employee goes to his check status page, you'll see the changes don't even show up in the list as possible ticket types or record types, right? Because it's going to apply that user criteria on the type record to drive which records can show up. Now this can apply for this check status type of status records. It can also apply to any of these other card object types, right? So if there's a table like knowledge articles, I only want this to show up for certain users, or there's other kind of records I want to show up in the search results page, I can associate the type of that record that shows up on the search page to a user criteria, and then only users with that user criteria would be able to see that. So hopefully this is helpful in seeing some of the updates we've made to card object management, some of the linkages to the different records, but also you can leverage user criteria to drive who can see what in terms of different types of record types. Hope this is helpful. Thank you.